Have you ever stopped to think about how just one single word, chosen by a translator centuries ago, could completely reshape how we understand a fundamental idea? Well, we're about to dive into a story about language, history, and how the meaning of one word can change, well, pretty much everything.
So let me start by asking a big question. Is the Bible you hold in your hands exactly what was originally written? I mean, are the words conveying the precise original meaning from the ancient Hebrew and Greek? That question, that's the tension we're going to unpack today. To really get why this matters so much, you have to start here, with this verse. A jot and tittle. What is those? They were the absolute smallest strokes of the pen in Hebrew writing. Think of it like the dot on an I or the cross on a T. So the message is clear. The original text is considered perfect, right down to the tiniest, most insignificant detail.
And that, right there, leads us straight to the core of the problem, the translation dilemma. If the original words are perfect and inspired, but what we're reading is a translation made by humans who aren't perfect, how do you square that circle?
So let's break this down. On one side, you've got the original text. That's the source, the authority. On the other side, you've got a translation. Now, a translation can be amazing, it can be faithful, but at the end of the day, it's still a human interpretation. It's kind of like a brilliant composer's original sheet music versus a live concert. The performance can be incredible, but it's still one orchestra's interpretation of that perfect score.
So look, the point here isn't about finding mistakes in the original word. Not at all. It's something a little more subtle, and maybe even more important. It's about how meaning can get lost, or even accidentally twisted, when you jump from one language, one culture, to a completely different one. A single word choice can sneak in a whole new concept that just wasn't there to begin with.
Okay, enough with the theory. Let's get our hands dirty and become linguistic detectives for a few minutes. We're going to put one single Greek word under the microscope, ekklesia.
So what is an ecclesia? Well, if you crack open a standard Greek dictionary, the definition seems really simple. It's an assembly, a gathering, a congregation. The root of the word literally means to call out from. So it's a group of people called out and brought together for some reason. Seems straightforward enough, right? But this is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Take a look at this verse from the book of Acts. It's describing a chaotic, angry riot in the city of Ephesus. And guess what Greek word is used to describe that mob? You guessed it, ekklesia. I mean, just think about that for a second. The Bible itself uses ecclesia to describe a confused, non-religious, even hostile mob. This is kind of the smoke and gun. It proves the word itself doesn't automatically mean church or holy building. It just means an assembly. What kind of assembly depends entirely on who showed up and why. Okay, so if ecclesia simply means a gathering or an assembly, then how on earth did we get the word church? This is where we trace the journey of how a translation choice didn't just swap one word for another, it might have swapped one concept for another. Let's do a quick trip through history. Back in the 1st century, ecclesia meant a gathered assembly. Simple. Then in 1526, the famous Bible translator William Tyndale chose the word congregation, which is a really solid match. But later on, especially after the hugely influential King James Version in 1611, the word church became the standard. And that word, well, it came with centuries of institutional and traditional meaning already attached to it. And when you put the two meanings side by side like this, wow, the difference is just night and day. Ecclesia points to an active, dynamic gathering of people, but the word church often makes us think of an institution, a physical building, or a specific denomination. The source we're looking at argues this isn't just a tiny difference in flavor, it's a major shift in the core concept.
The source presents verses like this one from Proverbs as a kind of warning label. The argument being made is that being faithful to the original text is a massive responsibility, and changing the meaning of the words, even if you don't mean to, even if it's just following tradition, is something to be taken very, very seriously. Okay, I know what you might be thinking. This is fascinating history, but so what? Why does some ancient Greek word matter to me today? Well, it turns out this little linguistic deep dive has some really big practical consequences for right now. Let's connect this ancient word to something super modern that we're all familiar with, online services and virtual small groups. Can a group of people meeting online be considered a biblical ecclesia? The answer to that question hinges almost entirely on how you define that original Greek word.
When you examine the New Testament, you start to see a clear pattern for what an ecclesia was. First, it always involved a physical gathering. That phrase, when you come together, shows up over and over again. Second, these assemblies had recognized appointed leaders or elders. And third, there was a defined structure for how things were supposed to work, an apostolic order.
And this brings us to the practical takeaway from the source material. The conclusion drawn is that while online fellowship and teaching are seen as a huge benefit, they don't actually fit that biblical pattern of an ecclesia, a physically gathered assembly. That one little word and its translation directly impacts how we view this very modern practice.
So, let's boil this all down. What are the big things to take away? First, translation choices are not just for academics in ivory towers. They have real-world effects on what we believe and how we live. Second, we've seen firsthand how one single word can shift our whole understanding of a key concept. And finally, the ultimate point is a challenge: to always test our traditions against the original scriptures, to be like the Bereans, who searched the scriptures daily to see if these things were so.
And I just want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. We just spent all this time on one word. If digging into just one word can uncover so much and challenge assumptions we've held for years, it just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What else might be waiting for us just beneath the surface in the original text?